I'd like to read a poem to start my talk tonight. O mind, you carry on your back. Your actions are like a heavy sack. No wonder that your shoulders ache. Another strain's enough to break your neck. So drop that stupid load. This is the last stop on the road where you can find rest. Stay. Be love's guest. This is a poem by Kabir, translated by Robert Bly. Kind of one of my favorites for this topic. And I'll read it again. O mind, you carry on your back. Your actions are like a heavy sack. No wonder that your shoulders ache. Another strain's enough to break your neck. So drop that stupid load. This is the last stop on the road where you can find rest. Stay. Be love's guest. So when I first heard that, I was on a meditation retreat several years ago, and I was just doing so much battle in my mind and so much judgment and so much criticism and so many memories of what an asshole I was and am. And so much, just so much of that kind of, the tyrant. Sometimes I call it the tyrant or the critic that just always had a negative view and wanted to tell me all the time. And particularly when I would meditate. And particularly when I would meditate on loving kindness. What would come up is all of the reasons that I don't deserve to be happy. This may or may not be true for you. This may or may not be an experience you have, and that's okay. There's no wrong way to experience meditation unless you don't do it at all. But engaging with the practice, then reflecting on what it's teaching you. So I started to become very familiar with this voice that was kind of always just kind of whispering in the back of my mind, but not super active. And when I started doing loving kindness and other of these sublime state practices or heart practices, it started to get really loud. Kind of like last week I was talking about Mara and how Mara in this personification really of our ego, of our egoic self is saying, like, what gives you the right? Or I'm going to try to find every reason for you to get angry so that you won't experience peace and ease. And that's kind of what that critic is, or the tyrant is to me. It's Mara tempting us to give up. So I heard this poem, and that, it's interesting that it's translated by Robert Bly, because there's this other kind of thing that popped out to me in my life around something that Robert Bly talks about around our shadow, and that we take these experiences in our lives, usually negative experiences that we don't want to deal with or process, and we throw them into our knapsack, the knapsack of our shadow. And oftentimes when we're trying to do this kind of meditative practice, what might come up is some of those stones, some of those memories, some of those experiences that we've tried to avoid. Now, I've talked with hundreds of students, at least. So I'm pretty sure it's a fairly common experience to some degree or another. So when I first heard this, drop that stupid load. This is the last stop on the road. It just made me think about, why am I carrying this shit around? I was once on this longer meditation retreat in Thailand, and I was sitting with all these monks, and I was not a monk, but I was practicing with them, and some of them were very novice monks. They were like, in Thailand, you can go and join the monastery and be a monk if you're a male, be a monk for 30 days or 2 weeks, just to kind of get some like kudos from your parents, and it's like a rite of passage, So I was in this month-long meditation retreat, and then these guys would come and they would, it was almost like they had gotten in trouble and their parents were like, you're going to the monastery. Like, you're going to go shave your eyebrows and be a monk for a month as your punishment. That's what it felt like. And anyway, I'm meditating with these monks and down different levels. And my mind was just like, I just couldn't escape the memories. And there was all of these memories of my childhood and a lot of stuff around my sister. I have a sister who's 4 years older than me, and we had a very kind of contentious relationship growing up, as older, younger siblings tend to. And so just a lot of that kind of, and then some sadness, and then some tears, and then some anger, and then it was just the full catastrophe. And so this, eventually what I started to recognize is doing this loving kindness practice is a purification. And that's the way it's talked about in Buddhism. That this practice, there's several ways to kind of work with it. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But one of the ways is that it's going to, by repeating these phrases, what I just shared as an experience may happen to you. And that's actually not a bad thing. But that's actually part of turning towards the knapsack and looking at the things that we avoid. And it's not our fault that we avoid things, feelings, experiences, our shitty pasts. It's not our fault. It's actually a survival skill to some degree. And I think it's important to really see that, and that we're not to blame for the ways in which we maybe have avoided, but we are responsible. We're able to respond, response able. And this is part of that, seeing things clearly, where this practice, and why we call it heart practice, because so much of what is happening is wounds in the heart, wounds of our lives. So drop that stupid load. This is the last stop on the road where you can rest, stay, and be love's guest. Kabir. So I'm going to kind of go over what are the sublime states. And then I'm going to loop back around to talking specifically about loving kindness and some of the benefits of loving kindness and metta for today. And we'll get as far as we're going to get, and then we'll see what happens. Maybe we'll pick it up next week. It's an ongoing process, an unfolding, if you will. All right, so the 4 sublime states, one of which we call metta, or loving kindness. friendliness. The second is known as karuna, and karuna is also translated as compassion or care. And then mudita. Mudita is translated, my favorite translation, it's often translated as sympathetic joy, but I don't really like that translation. And I like the translation of selfless joy. And this is the idea of cultivating this kind of joy in the benefit of others, or in the goodness of others, or in the success of others. Right? So it's selfless joy, where like seeing someone else succeed, you become elated instead of what the opposite might happen, jealous or envious. And then the last of these four sublime states, or sometimes they're called Brahma Viharas, is equanimity, or upekkha. And so equanimity is a way of talking about balance, balanced heart-mind. And it's a lot of the ways we talk about wisdom and compassion in Buddhism need to be balanced. That I think I've shared in this room, and definitely with maybe some of you, that for a long time I didn't really buy the heart practices. I thought they were just some later addition that the hippies brought in this late 60s, early 70s, when they were all coming back from India and Burma, and they were like, well, we have to make this palatable to the hippie generation, and so we're going to add some loving kindness. I just was kind of like, I don't know about all this. When I first kind of heard it, I was much more interested in wisdom and clear comprehension and mental powers, and I had levitation. Like it was really that was my entrance, and calming the critical mind. I was pretty interested in that because I experienced that pretty early on. I started meditating when I was about 16, on the advice of my psychologist, who I was court ordered to see for various things. Anger being one of them, drugs being another, just being a punk kid, basically, with a fucked up family life. And meditation was helpful. All right, so these sublime states, I think of them as the four chambers of the heart. That the heart is one organ, and it works in four chambers, right? So we have the chamber of loving kindness, we have the chamber of compassion, we have the chamber of selfless joy, and we have the chamber of equanimity. And each one of those chambers work with each other to, call or to be or to have, and it pump oxygenated blood through the body. I mean, it's life sustaining. And that if one of those chambers isn't working correctly, then there's complications. And so ultimately, this is the teaching of the sublime states, is that we're developing all of them, not just one. And so, I just like that analogy. And because we call it heart practice, this idea of kind of like, we're building the muscle of loving kindness, of friendliness. We're building the muscle of sympathetic or selfless joy. We're building the muscle of compassion. We're building the muscle of mental and emotional balance. So this is just another way that I like to kind of think about. Sometimes I give the analogy of let's see if I wrote it down here, the analogy of a house, but I'm not going to get into that. Or maybe I will. All right. So in Pali, the language of the Buddhist scriptures, these four are known under the name of Brahma Vihara, and they can also be described as excellent, lofty, sublime states of mind, or alternatively known as the Brahma-like or God-like abodes, places of dwelling. So the Buddha taught that these are all four of these are the direct counterbalance to unskillful or entangling or unhelpful states of mind. So I want to just say in Buddhism, there's this word chitta, and the word chitta means mind-heart, because within Buddhism, there really isn't a difference between what we call mind and what we call heart. And it's not actually anatomical heart or brain. It's this kind of interplay between all of our kind of faculties. So just to kind of say. All right. So like I was saying, I didn't really buy this right away. Some of my early practices, I had, started with Zen, and I had this psychologist who taught me a very gentle love, not loving kindness, but a very gentle breath practice, very similar to what we do in Vipassana or in insight practice. This kind of, gently following the breath, breathing in, know you're breathing in, breathing out, know you're breathing out. And then in Zen, I had just it was more of a kind of a martial arts background. So it was more of a kind of austere, like, so Zen, like just sit no matter what, and whatever's going on in your mind. And luckily I had this instruction because I wasn't really given any other instructions during my Zen period. I was just, had that simple practice from my psychologist, who is still one of my longest mentors. I met him when I was 15 years old. And he's the first person to teach me meditation, and he's still teaching me today. So after years of practice of Zen and, general meditation practice and breath and body practice, I had become kind of a Dharma soldier. Like I had kind of learned to kind of concentrate the mind and sharpen the attention. And I gained some skill, but I was really out of balance because I was actually I remember this one time my car had like a 68 Nova, and it was like my pride. I loved it. Right? It was a drag race, all these Corvettes and shit. And something happened, like my steering wheel, that power steering, like I didn't put power steering fluid in it. And so it locked up on me while I was kind of like totally going way too fast. And I lost my shit. And I jumped out of the car and I literally started punching and kicking and beating up my car. Like dents all around it. And I just lost it. And I had been meditating for several years. And I didn't have any balance. And that was actually a huge eye opener of like, wow, like maybe I really need to kind of like look at this, the aspects of these heart practices is that we can begin to kind of untangle some of that reactivity and perhaps allow what I'm calling the purification is allowing some of the unattended sorrow and grief and fear and anger that we have maybe perhaps been avoiding to come up and to process in a safe place. So just to kind of say that much. All right. So I did a little investigation as I started to understand more about Buddhism. I started to investigate what are some of the writers and commentators are talking about. So I came across several books, but this one in particular by a monk by the name of Nyanaponika Thera. Nyanaponika Thera was a German-born Sri Lankan monk, one of the most scholarly of his time. And he wrote several books on Buddhism and then since then his like the same kind of lineage is also where Bhikkhu Bodhi, who is also a really well-known scholar, comes from as well. In Sri Lanka is known as kind of the hub of Buddhism because really Sri Lanka in some ways saved Buddhism Like there's pretty much no more Buddhism in India, because it was kind of cast out, and massive, killings and whatnot. So anyway, Nyanaponika Thera wrote about the sublime states, and I'm just going to read a couple of the things that he talked about and then give a little bit of context. So the 4 attitudes, are said to be excellent or sublime because they are the right or ideal way of conduct towards living beings. That they provide, in fact, the answer to all situations arising from social contact. So all of the ways in which we rub up against each other in those ways that are sharp, that are jagged, that we hit our edges, right? Like driving in traffic, right? Prime example of I'm in my car and you're in your car and we both want to get in one lane and there's a jagged edge, and, and then even within our own families, right? Or the people that we work with, or just thinking about, as we kind of walk through our social constructs. So that these are helpful. They are the great removers of tension, the great peacemakers in social conflict, and the great healers of wounds suffered in the struggle for existence, or the struggle of existence. And then the last kind of quote that popped out to me is that they, meaning the Brahma Viharas or the sublime states, that they level social barriers, they build harmonious communities, awaken slumbering nobility long forgotten, revive joy and hope long abandoned, and promote human brotherhood and sisterhood against the forces of egotism. So I just kind of like that. When I read that, I was like, okay, first of all, this is an extremely scholarly monk, and he wrote like tons of books about the life of the Buddha and the core of Buddha's teachings. And so it was a trusted source. So I started to think, okay, maybe there's something to this heart practice stuff. But I still didn't really do it until I had a horrible breakup. I had a horrible breakup there's been a few, but this one was kind of mid 90s, and we were going to get married, and it was living together, and it was just all of these wonderful things that then didn't materialize, and it was rough. It was really hard, and I couldn't do this breath meditation practice anymore. Like I couldn't just rest in this kind of ease of breath. This anapanasati, this mindfulness and wisdom of the in and out breath just didn't really work for me. Because my mind was so, she did this and she did that, and then guilt and remorse and just back and forth. You ever been through a breakup? You know what that's like. And then it was the future, and I just was crazy in my mind. So actually someone suggested to me, well, maybe try just repeating those metta phrases. And very similar to the ones that we did tonight. And I started it, and I was doing it, and it was all that I could do, right? Because I started to notice that what would happen is I would get narrow in my focus, and just the phrases. May I be happy. May I be peaceful. May I be free from suffering. May she be happy. May she be peaceful. May she be free from suffering. May her new boyfriend be happy. May her new boyfriend be peaceful. May her new boyfriend be free from suffering. Maybe not, but then it's back. And it started to kind of shift. There was 2 things that happened. One, saying it over and over again in my mind, even though I didn't necessarily believe it in the beginning, there was a calming effect, and I became less reactive. And the second thing is that saying it over and over in my mind, I began to kind of, it was just a way to narrow my focus. So I wasn't being attacked by Mara or by all of the jealousy and the envy and the regret and the remorse that maybe some of you have experienced. So that's kind of how I started, where I was like, okay, I've done a little reading and it made sense to me. And then I went to a little bit of my own trauma, my own suffering around it, where what I had been doing, this kind of wisdom practice, this Vipassana practice, just didn't work anymore, and for a period of time. And then so I shifted and I found some relief there, and it really changed for me. The same thing also happened when I was in Thailand. This was kind of years later, but when I was in Thailand and telling you the story when I was with the monks, and then I was, what sometimes is called monkey mind, but I actually kind of call it like vomiting mind. Like my mind was just vomiting all this crap that was kind of buried, actually. Things like when I was 10 years old and like stuff that I hadn't, I was pulling these unattended wounds and sorrows and regrets out of my mind and my heart. And then I began, because I had already had that practice, I began to kind of just do this compassion practice and this loving kindness practice. So I found it to be really helpful. All right, so I'm going to do a few more pieces and then we'll open up to some questions. And just so you know, this is an unfolding process. Everything that happens here is an unfolding, right? There's no A, B. It's A and A-1 and A-2 and then A-3 and then B and then B-1 and B-2. There's just constantly kind of more being revealed, more being understood, which is one of the things I love about Buddhism, is that it's simple and deep. Simple and deep. And that sometimes, we won't, you can hear the same Dharma talk or the same topic 100 times. And on the 101st time, because it aligns with a particular, what's happening in your life perhaps, or who knows, it may drop in. That's kind of what happened with me. I had heard about Metta. I had heard about loving kindness. I had heard about compassion. But I just kind of discarded it, like I said, as some later addition the hippies came up with. And when I was really in a negative or dire strait, I started to practice. I also felt the same way about walking meditation too, by the way. And then when it wasn't working for me, I just kept doing it, and then I had a verified experience. And that's one of the things that we talk about here a lot, is having verified faith, not blind faith. So we can be skeptical here, actually. You can ask questions here. You can not know and not have to accept something on blind faith. See for yourself. One of my favorite teachings from the Buddha. All right. Yeah, I feel like what are the opposites of these? What are the opposites of metta? Metta or loving kindness. Even just the word loving kindness really rubbed me the wrong way when I was younger, right? And when I first kind of heard it. And so, coming up with positive regard, right? Universal positive regard. I could get with that. Friendliness even. I could get with that because I wanted to be friendly with people. I wanted to have some positive regard both for myself and for others. But this idea of loving kindness, it just was too, sissy la or something. Like I just felt like I just couldn't get with it. And come to find out that actually is not necessarily the most accurate translation, that friendliness is one of the most, or kindness is one of the most accurate translations of metta. So I like positive regard because it was easier for me this idea of extending positive regard for people. Even people that I kind of was still pissed at, I could send positive regard for them. And then also, in the punk rock community that I grew up in, and kind of in the 90s, there was like this hardcore scene, and it was positive PMA, positive mental attitude, right? So it was really there was all these bands coming out that were talking about PMA, positive mental attitude. And so I got with that too. That it kind of made sense. It kind of came together. Oh, so what we're really actually doing is creating a positive mental attitude. And how are we doing that? Through repeated phrase, through shifting, by seeing some of our mind states and being able to shift them. So let's see. So loving kindness. So another thing that kind of stuck out to me is that Vipassana, or insight practice, meditation practice, wisdom practice, they seem to have opposing kind of views. When I was practicing Vipassana, and then I started practicing Metta, or loving kindness practice. So in Vipassana, we're learning to rebel or ignore against the conceptual mind, at least at first. That's kind of the first instruction, right? We often give here is like, yeah, thoughts are going to come. You're not your thoughts. Let them go. Let them pass. We don't need to try to not think, because that's kind of impossible. Just like, yeah, don't salivate. Just tell your stomach not to digest. Just tell your mind not to think. It's kind of like the same thing. Right. So, because it's a process. It's one of the processes of this body. So the same idea of like learning to kind of rebel against or ignore the conceptual mind at first and stay connected to some of the anatomical processes like breath or body scanning, these kinds of things. Yet in loving kindness, we're actually re-engaging this conceptual mind, but also purifying or reshaping it towards the greater good. So maybe you noticed that, I gave you some visuals tonight, and, this kind of gem in the heart, or a coal, picturing yourself as a child or as a younger you. These are, ways of engaging the conceptual mind, and doing so in a different way, right? Yeah. So by focusing on our own kind of good nature and the good nature of others. So this is just one of the things that is like a distinction, I think, between Vipassana, where we're not necessarily giving, especially in the beginning, the first couple foundations, we're not really giving a lot of attention to our thinking process. But we're just allowing it to arise and pass away. Yet during the Brahma Viharas or the Metta practice, it's very intentional. Like we're staying very intentionally connected to the phrases and connected to what is actually happening while we're saying these phrases, right? Is there visuals coming up? Is there memories coming up, right? And to be aware of that, not get lost in it, but to be aware of it. All right. So I feel like I'm going to end there for now, and we'll maybe pick this up next week, but I want to open up for questions. Any thoughts you have based on anything that I've kind of shared so far? Please, Linda Lee.
The different styles, maybe if that's the right word, of meditation. Can you incorporate both of those in one sitting? Where you start with one and then go to the other style, or is there? What are your thoughts on that? If you could.
Yeah, no, great question. So the question is, in case people at home didn't hear, like, can you use both styles or techniques? And I used to think no. I used to think you had to do, because when I was traditionally trained, it was you do a period of Vipassana practice, or you're meditating for 12 hours a day, Vipassana, but then you get 1 hour a day of Metta. So it was like an after dinner mint, right? Like you would get it like later in the evening when you were exhausted. Okay, I would get to just relax and think about loving kindness, right? So that was the way it's kind of traditionally done. one of the things that Noah created, well, he didn't necessarily create it, but it kind of made or popularized, is this idea of kind awareness, which is pretty much what we teach here all the time, which is to recognize when your attention wanders off. And then right there, I call it fusion. We're infusing loving kindness, compassion into that moment where we would normally judge or normally check out or normally have some kind of comparing mind. So right there, with a sense of, you'll always hear me say, with a sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind, aim your attention back. So that is what I call fusion, or what Noah calls kind awareness. So so yes, in that way. And then in another way, sometimes what people do is they'll do like set a clock, like let's say it's a 30-minute meditation, and they'll use the first 20 minutes in Vipassana, and then have a bell go off or something, and then do loving kindness for the last 10 minutes, or if they're doing a 45-minute sit, first 30 minutes, and then last 15 minutes, or however, but play with it. Yeah, it's totally fine. And then another thing that I found, I was in the monastery it was actually called a fusion retreat in Burma, in Myanmar. And they just it was a month-long meditation retreat. And the first 2 weeks were loving kindness. And I was like, what? Because the first 2 weeks, well, maybe it wasn't fully 2 weeks. I think it was. Anyway, the first part of the meditation retreat, which is usually the most difficult part of a meditation retreat, and the most difficult part of meditation is the beginning, right? So it was like radical that they were just using loving kindness phrases, using compassionate phrases compassion towards the body because it was achy and sore, and we're sitting and we haven't been used to sitting. So did that for the first 2 weeks, and then dropped into Vipassana, and it was like, oh, wow, so rewarding for me. So that is another way in which we utilize kind of fusion, and we've played with that here at Against the Stream too, starting with loving kindness, starting with compassion, and then opening, once the mind and body settle, opening to Vipassana or insight practice. So yeah, absolutely, and find your way with it. That's the other thing, right? These are just different techniques and tools. Great question. Thanks. I had that there to cover, so you helped me. Anything else? Questions? Anything you didn't understand? I know a couple of you are fairly new. Please.
When you started getting into the metta, did you find it gave relief for your own self-judgment first, or your judgment of others first? Or did it kind of happen simultaneously?
It was kind of like it just turned the volume down. It's hard to describe. So here's the thing. There's two main things that are happening with metta. Okay. There is this way in which we're going to live our life carrying this kind of idea of metta, this idea of friendliness, this idea of positive regard out into our lives. So every interaction that we have, through sustained practice over periods of time, it starts to become a part of us, right? We're actually literally changing our brain, creating new neural pathways against the negative bias and towards creating, new habits of positivity, right? And actually there's tons of studies done now on, because at first it was mindfulness, right? For the last, 10 years, or actually 15 years, 20 years now, since like 2001, everyone was like studying mindfulness, all these neuroscientists. So, oh, wow, this is so amazing. Yeah, it's 2,600 years old, but glad you guys caught up. And doing all these studies, which has been amazing. And then the last 10 years or so, everyone was like, oh, wait, what about this loving kindness? What about this metta? What about this compassion practice? And then now there's this huge study around a huge new body of studies around compassion. And what they're really seeing is that we literally can change the habits of our mind to incline towards being less judgmental, more selfless, less ego-driven. Basically, what is it? But this is the counterattack to greed, hatred, and delusion, right? So this way in which when we practice, where you might find, and those of you who have maybe been doing this practice for a while, you might find, oh, I'm a little less judgmental, or I'm a little less quick to reaction. I'm a little more friendly. So what I noticed was in the beginning that I was less critical of myself, and in turn, less critical of others, right? Yeah. But it was both practices though. So that's one way. The other way is that when we're using there's this way in which we can use these phrases as a very narrow focus or concentration practice to get what's called absorption or jhanas, right? And this is the other way that I feel like it helped me during that breakup, is that my mind was the tyrant, the critical mind, the regret, the remorse was so intense that I couldn't just sit with the breath. And so I just used, may I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be free from suffering, may I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be free from suffering, over and over and over and over and over. And it narrowed the focus and quieted the mind, which is what concentration practice does. Concentration practice allows us to feel what's called samatha, or well-being, kind of calm, tranquility, because it kind of shuts out all of the negative talk. So that's the two ways in which metta and all of these Bhakti Viharas actually work. Awesome. Your guys' questions got the rest of the things I wanted to talk about. Any others? I got a couple more things I wanted to cover if you ask any old question, I'm sure I'll blend it in. Okay. Some teachings on, we'll end in a few minutes, but some teachings on metta this is from the Dhammapada. It's called Hatred Never Dispels Hate. Look how he abused me, beat me, how he threw me down, robbed me. Live with such thoughts and you live in hate. Look how he abused me, beat me, how he threw me down, robbed me. Abandon such thoughts and live in love. In this world, hatred never yet dispelled hate. Only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. You too shall pass away. Knowing this, how can you quarrel? Thoughts about that? I used to have some problems with that. And because I felt like I had some justifiable anger. I had some reasons in my life to hate. Yet it didn't actually do me any good. It just fed on itself and created more aversion. That's been my experience. Now, what the statement says is dwelling on the shit that happens is actually not very helpful. Doesn't mean forgiving the abuser. It doesn't mean, we have to let it roll, let everything roll off our backs. Not at all. But it's saying sitting there, dwelling, holding the hot coal of anger just burns you. So I'll share this story. So my mother died in September. My mother was sick for a long time. Her own addiction, her own struggles. She had congestive heart failure. She had COPD for years. So this kind of heart oxygen. She just, she had ailing health based on, lifestyle and who knows what. But my mother and when I was young, there was stuff that happened, lots of challenges, difficulties, addiction, abandonment, stuff that happened. And I had a lot of anger and a lot of discord with my mom. And over the years, and particularly over this kind of practice of just really like touching that pain in my heart and mind and not turning away from it and actually allowing myself to feel it, I began to, and then also like making amends to my mother, having my mother make amends to me, and just stayed engaged. And it could have been really easy for me to just move away and just disconnect and, and I'm really grateful that I had, I had those experiences. And I was reflecting on it after my mom died. In September, and while we were getting her cremated, and there was nothing left unsaid with my mother. We talked about her death regularly. I was the only one that she would talk to about because of my practice, because she knew that I could handle it, that I understood that we're all going to die, and that there was it's like. Forgiveness was a huge part, but only because I was able to have a connection with her that was about me stripping my anger and just seeing her for all of the difficulties that she had, all of the challenges, in her life, and seeing also like the way that meditation does. That spills out. Our suffering spills out. If we can't process it, contain it, resolve it, it spills out all over the place, generation after generation. So I'm really grateful for this practice, for giving me that opportunity. And we need to end now. So stay tuned. Next week, we'll maybe cover some more metta, and then we'll move into others. So what we'll do is we'll do a practice, and we'll do a talk based on one of the sublime states. And on the list is compassion next week, and so please attend or check in. Yeah, so just know that you can, there's a few things. One, all of the donations that get given or donated to this center go to the continuation of these classes to be here. And, I want to just let you know that we've been running at a deficit. That it costs $3,000 for this building, a month, and we're not making that. And so one of the things I've decided to do is to just relinquish any dana that I would receive and give it to the center to help sustain the center, because this is my spiritual home. And so just know that. And that any amount that you can give, suggested 5 to 15, or 15, something like that. But give what you can. And no one is ever turned away for lack of funds or lack of ability. That's not the way we work here. This is a pay it forward, generosity-based economy, donation-based economy. So, but yet it's not, think about what would you pay for a yoga class? What would you pay, to go see a movie, right? Maybe I'm not as entertaining as, Will Smith and the Bad Boys, but, just to think about that, right? Things have changed and we need support. So please give what you can. And if you can't give in that way, come early and help set up or help us clean up or, bring snacks, or if you have tea that you can donate, just in some way, find a way to lighten your own load. Okay. All right. And online, you can add Venmo against the stream, meditation, and there's donation against the stream. Our website against the stream, there's a donation button, so you can go and give that way as well if you don't, however, have the cash or whatever. Yes. Okay, so just taking a moment, and you can clasp your hands or not clasp your hands. It's not a big deal. But just taking all the goodness of our practice, all of the goodness of our time together, we're just taking it in. This is the blessing sublime. Is practicing the Dharma, hearing the Dharma, and for me, teaching the Dharma. So may all the goodness of our practice be dedicated to the freedom from suffering for all beings everywhere.